The boy blunder. Alas, I was hoping you would be flat enough to fold into a little paper hat by now.
Crazy Quilt, the patchwork villain with a surprisingly dark origin, or rather evolution, and also a hate-on for the boy wonder, Robin. This after being blinded by the Cape Crusader's sidekick. It doesn't exactly sound like a likely candidate for storyline adaptation, and yet here we are, for Batman Brave and the Bold did just that. We're gonna be taking a look at the episode The Color of Revenge. It's not just a dish best served cold. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and we're gonna take a look at an interesting episode that melded a lot of different canons together and went a bit into the friction between a grown-up pre-Nightwing Robin and Batman, utilizing a villain that is oftentimes thought of as a joke, but goes a bit harder than people may expect based upon his appearance. It's an interesting and at times amusingly tongue-in-cheek time.
Wait, Robin, it's a trick.
I can handle whatever this Z-lister's got.
The Color of Revenge was the 18th episode of the first season of Batman the Brave and the Bold. It aired in 2009 and was written by Todd Casey. It's also one of the rare episodes where the teaser at the start, pre-intro, ties directly into the main episode. In this case, introducing us to the young days of the dynamic duo as they seek out Crazy Quilt. Now, there have been a couple of Crazy Quilts and the history is almost convoluted. And if you look them up, be sure to add Crazy Quilt DC, otherwise you're just gonna get actual Crazy Quilts, which are a thing. And yes, they do look like his costume. The first Crazy Quilt debuted in Boy Commandos number 15 in 1946, created by Jack Kirby, and that version was not named. But he did have a complete history. He was an artist, a famous painter who dabbled on crime on the side. By dabbled, I mean he was also a criminal mastermind. Get yourself a man who can do both? And even as far back as the 1940s, he would get that iconic helmet. His origin was that he was blinded by a gunshot wound, and attempts to restore his vision left him only able to see extremely bright colors. We learned about this in issue 15. In his next appearance in issue 18, he got the helmet. This helmet allowed him to see, and also projected out light beams. Next up, a version named Paul Decker, who was created by Dick Dillon, and who debuted as a Black Hawks villain in Black Hawk number 180 in 1963. This version was not an artist, he was a fence. He stole art, and he went by the name Crazy Quilts. Cause he could, why not? Now for a while it was assumed that this was just the same Crazy Quilt, but through shenanigans and just eventually a definition inside the DC Encyclopedia, it was defined that these were two separate Crazy Quilts, even though really you could have left them as one, but no, they're separate. And here's where it gets a little bit convoluted. The Black Hawks Paul Decker version only appeared once, but the name would stick and then be applied to the first Crazy Quilt to appear. This is why they had to clarify. So now the initial Crazy Quilt, the Boy Commando Crazy Quilt, in the Bronze Age he would firmly become a Batman villain, or more specifically, a Robin villain. The story that's going to be referenced in The Color of Revenge comes to us from Batman number 316. It was written by Len Wein, with art by Irv Novick. The story was called Color Me Deadly, and here's where it's important to note that Crazy Quilt had already fought Robin earlier in Star Spangled Comics 123, published in the year 1951, which for a time had stories featuring Robin, highlighting him by himself. That story was called Crazy Quilt Comes Back. So from a very early part of comics history, he was positioned as a villain for Robin. Now this Batman 316 story is pretty intense. Decker learns that his sight is deteriorating, and that within a few months he's going to be completely blind. So he seeks out a scientist who can help him by performing surgery on his eyes. And to do this, he goes to Star Labs and under pain of helmet, grabs a doctor to do surgery on him. Here he encounters the Dark Knight and Robin, and they have a bit of a tussle. He escapes and goes to get the surgery done. Also, as he recounts his backstory to the surgeon, he calls himself the King of Color Crimes. I just felt that you should know that. That name's gonna get him canceled. While the operation is a success, the doctor warns him he can't use his eyes too much, too soon. But Decker doesn't care. He's set for a life of crime. And in a tragic turn of events, when Batman and Robin show up to stop him, Robin reflects the rays from his own helmet back at him and ends up blinding him permanently. It's a lot. You're gonna die. 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 Please. Why don't you let me die?
No, Crazy Quilt. Nobody will die if I can help it. Now why don't you let us help you?
I don't get it. What the heck has happened to him? I warned Quilt before the operation that his optic nerves would be terribly sensitive for a while. Having those strange lights shine back into his eyes was more than they could stand.
Crazy Quilt is blind, Robin. And this time, it's forever.
Whew, that was a lot. There was a lot of ideations there from Crazy Quilt. Next month, the Riddler. This evolution, this trajectory for Crazy Quilt would stick. It would cement him as a Robin hater, leading to him doing things like mistakenly targeting Jason Todd during his time as Robin in the story A Revenge of Rainbows from Batman 368, which was also the story that officially introduced Todd as Robin. This was pre-Crisis, so no stealing tires off the Batmobile yet. This was red-haired ginger Jason Todd, who pretty much had Dick's backstory, and he dyed his hair so he could look more like him. And this issue would see him being beaten by a vengeful Crazy Quilt, What a time to be Jason. And then the New 52 happened, but that's a story for another time. So with all that preamble, let's get to our episode and the teaser. You just had to know about Crazy Quilt. There's not often a chance to talk about him, so when it comes up, I'll take it. We open on the dynamic duo hunting down Crazy Quilt, and like most Batman the Brave and the Bold episodes, a lot of elements are mushed together. You have the Golden Age Dick Sprang influenced art, the vibe of the 1960s Batman, in that whenever they do a flashback to the past, they'll often use references to the Batman 66 series. In this case, you get to see them walking that wonderful horizontal vertical walk up the building. All of this is so that they can confront Crazy Quilt. This opening sequence recreates the blind nymph Crazy Quilt, but with a less depressing tone. It's still dark.
I guess Crazy Quilt finally saw the light, Batman.
Yes, Robin. He's learned the hard way that justice is blind.
This opener is also here to showcase how in sync Batman and Robin were in this moment, because that is not the case in the present, where a now adult Robin has relocated to Bloodhaven. He's still Robin at this point, he's not Nightwing yet. He is in a different costume, a more grown-up costume. It's very reminiscent of his Earth 2 costume. It's one that you can see in various stories. Earth 2 had a very different history than Earth 1 because that was the Golden Age Earth, and so things would begin to develop differently as they did more stories on it. In that universe, Dick Grayson stayed Robin. He didn't become Nightwing. Robin's enjoying Bloodhaven. He's his own hero, people respect him, but he still feels a bit like he's in Batman's shadow, which is not aided when the Dark Knight himself shows up to help him with Crazy Quilt, who's escaped and he's after him.
Strange. It looks like...
Morse code. It spells out an address on the corner of Haney and Aparo.
What are you doing here?
That was a nice reference to some prominent creators in the Brave and the Bold comic, Bob Haney and Jim Aparo. This episode walks the line of dealing with Robin's complicated feelings towards Batman in this time period without moving him into the turf more commonly thought to be occupied by post-crisis Jason, or just, you know, Edge.
Batman.
We see in this episode how what Robin wants isn't necessarily not to be associated with Batman, but rather to have respect and acknowledgement of his own skills, and to not be overlooked when Batman happens to be present. But when Batman shows up, he has a habit of slipping back into old patterns. Batman, that is. But this episode also does a nice job of highlighting that sometimes he's right and Robin does still need guidance, but also sometimes that happens because Robin is reacting to how Batman is treating him. He's acting up. Crazy Quilt is utilized well here as a connective thread. He also provides a genuine threat, even though his traps are very campy. He's treated a bit less seriously than in the comics where he's really gunning for Robin, but thematically those elements are still there. This episode really highlights how villains like Quilt still deserve to be taken seriously and can be used to great effect. They're not just throwaway villains, even if their costumes are garish. Also, it shows you can balance having something that is threatening with something that's a bit more fun. It's a razor's edge to walk. When you walk it well, it's very effective. Seeing Robin get to be foregrounded and feel fleshed out is a treat this episode. Although it also has its weaker moments, like Robin just proclaiming his identity out to the void.
Once a flying Grayson, always a flying Grayson.
I sure hope no one heard that or cares to look into it. That was more than a breadcrumb, it was a whole loaf. Although maybe that line's there so people know which Robin this is. If Teen Titans taught me anything, it's that even if you drop numerous super obvious hints in dialogue and as visual Easter eggs, unless you say it outright, some people will always wonder / push back as to which Robin it is. This leaves no wiggle room. This is Dick. It also lends credence though to Batman's whole he's not ready kind of hovering attitude that he's trying to suppress not all that well. He's proud, but concerned. Which brings us to one of the more frustrating elements of this episode, which is how while it does bring up how overbearing Batman can be, it doesn't fully call him to task on it. Although it is nice that Batman is shown to have those negative traits, but that they're not coming from a place of malice. He's viewing Robin as a child, not realizing he's been underestimating him, or even if he hasn't been, he's been acting like he does, not allowing him to grow. Then he also does things like literally ignore when Robin solves a clue before him, or maybe he's just so caught up solving it himself that he doesn't notice. Either way, it still really gets under Robin's skin, and it's presented in such a way that it could get under the viewers too, but it's supposed to. You're supposed to be like, the idea of Batman being a bit oblivious to what he's doing and how it's impacting Robin, and even a bit annoyed by it, is very in character though, and not something you often see presented in a balanced way as it is here for the most part. Even if it slides a bit more to Batman being right, but it is his show, and just that was the tone of this a little bit, that Batman could do anything. He's awesome, Silver Age. So it's understandable. I can see how some would find it annoying. It's definitely not as frustrating as what happened in the Nightwing episode. For me, just the fact that Batman's not wholly right or just made a monster is refreshing. Nuance, my favorite spice. Of course, Robin gets his moment to shine after Batman is kidnapped, and he gets to come in and kind of save the day. Not entirely, but he does get to take lead and show that he knows what he's doing. And they put Crazy Quilt away. for now. On the whole, it's a fun episode. The art crimes and visual jokes are on point. Quilt slots into the series' tone, and the conflict between Batman and Robin feels genuine, but not melodramatic or overblown. Frustrated, but still loving. Father-son vibes. They're both trying. And seeing Dick excited to work with Bruce again for old time's sake against Killer Moth at the end, now that Batman has eased up a bit on his overbearingness, showing that Robin was also putting up a bit of a front, it's heartwarming.
If you're up for it.
Gosh, I mean, sure.
It's sweet, despite the background of a blind and adult Crazy Quilt. Jeffrey Tambor delivers a very campy but still nuanced quilt. It has that Ham King Tut energy that always made those Batman 66 episodes such a treat. Just that feeling of the actor is having fun, which translates into it feeling like the villain is having fun. I have a soft spot for a villain who looks this outlandish, but can also be deep and dangerous. It's also nice to have the dynamic shifted where somebody hates Robin more than Batman, which also gives Robin a chance to come into his own and showcase his own different methods and style. So yeah, this was the time that Robin blinded a guy and asserted his independence. The color of revenge is all of them. Revenge is a dish that shouldn't be monochrome. This episode also acknowledged that back in the Golden Age, Dick was 8.
I thought you liked the sidecar.
Yeah, when I was 8.
I mean, he turned 8 on panel, so 7. Or did he turn 10? I'm never sure what to do with those extra birthday spanks at the end. It's a foreign concept to me. Do you spank to the number and then the 2 are extra? Or are the 2 adding up to the number? I do not know the tradition of birthday spanks. But all of these are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Did you know about all of that history between Crazy Quilt and Robin? Do you think the Bat Fam needs more villains that break away from Batman and then start attaching themselves to other members of the Bat family? I mean, they have so many choices. Which episode of Batman the Brave and the Bold should we look at next? Or an episode from another series? Or a comic you really want to hear about? You know I want to hear what you have to say. Put all your thoughts down below. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things like share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.